Hey, I didn't mean to open on a commercial of CB or what is it? ABC? I don't even know anymore. ABC's debate coverage. Welcome. We have T minus 6 minutes to honestly, if you thought that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump couldn't be any more dissimilar, I might raise you JD Vance and Tim Walz. And there's a number of things I would like to see tonight. Okay, so meaning like they are so dissimilar. Yeah, they're two white guys, straight cis white dudes. I get that. But in terms of approach to their politics, in terms of how much money they have, in terms of who they work for, who is a Peter Thiel PayPal blood boy, and who was a former coach and actually worked with children, who only screeches about children being groomed, who seems like he might have actually raised his own kids that he had via IVF, and who has never actually like read a bedtime story in their life. You've got JD Vance versus Tim Walz, and it's going to be very interesting to see JD Vance attempt to demonize Tim Walz's progressive policy points, demonize universal school lunch programs in Minnesota, or demonize putting period products in schools, right? Or demonize, all kinds of I mean, honestly, the news cycle has moved on from Tim Walz to the point where like I can't even remember all the things that he's done that are very good. But shit is good. It is CBS, thank you. Not, it doesn't actually matter, but it is CBS. ABC was last time. We do know that they are not going to be fact checking either JD Vance or Tim Walz, so that'll be interesting. So JD can just be like, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and I hope that they are asked about that. What I would like to see from Tim Walz is actually going low. I would like to see the same, their weird, their creepy fervor that he reserves for, friendly news outlets. I'd like to see him do that to JD Vance. I would like to see him poke holes in JD Vance's ridiculous childcare ideas, which are basically get mom and dad to help out. I'd like to see JD Vance. I'd like to see him go after JD Vance for having nothing but reprehensible and reactionary views on women and their bodies. You're going to hear a lot of JD Vance saying, I never said that. Okay, that is an exaggeration. You're going to hear a lot of pivoting from JD Vance. And so I think what we've seen Tim Walz be able to do is to simultaneously, a little bit of what we saw Kamala Harris do in her debate, which is sneak diss, like be able to sneak diss the other side and then build and paint a picture of what he is for, what he likes. We've heard him basically articulate a message of like feels more radical, feels more progressive. It doesn't just feel like, why can't we all get along? It feels like, no, we do this by lifting all boats, and not just the yachts. And we have done that in my state. I have not alienated. I mean, JD Vance is going to make all kinds of allegations about alienating, business, and we're going to see the opposite of that. All right, it is starting. So let's just go. I apologies.
Lone man behind his lectern. Ed, give us your last thoughts as we watch.
I don't know what they're doing.
JD Vance is off in the wings for the moment. Oh, there he is.
It's performance. That seems obvious, but no full.
JD Vance already looking hella awkward. Anyone else?
That's what they'll be looking for tonight.
JD Vance already looking uncomfortable and awkward like he always does. Who's going to know what to do with their hands?
JD Vance doing the same as our colleagues.
And they were shaking hands before the cameras came.
That's right.
Yeah, I'll turn it up once they start yapping.
Coming up in a moment, it will be moderated by our own Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. Ohio Senator JD Vance and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz take the stage. Well, they've taken the stage, so stick with us here and join us also on our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7, for exclusive content you won't see anywhere else. Thank you for joining us.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we've seen it other places, but that's cool. Here we go. America decides between a neo-fascist and a venture capitalist and other people who are not those awful things. Not a hard choice, if you ask me, but then again, maybe I'm out of touch with the American people. So I definitely want to see them go a little bit hard, and I think they will. Also, I think that Tim Walz needs to talk about JD Vance calling Donald Trump Hitler and saying that he failed on every promise and that he's a fake populist. Okay, here we go.
Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator JD Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this
20 states that are underwater.
Either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
With blood.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New
We're
York.
still here.
America decides, the vice presidential debate.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate.
It sucks they're not
CBS on other
fact
networks
checking
here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues.
Because these are two tough asses.
Let's introduce the candidates.
Like I've seen them in interviews. They're pretty good.
And Ohio's Republican Senator JD Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
Does Margaret get to say anything? Is that her name?
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate
the music thing. It just feels very like I'm in a comic.
To fact check claims made by each other.
Also, if you want to support my show, TBR-Live on Venmo, TBR Live on Cash App, or
we have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started.
Whatever. You're
Tonight,
welcome.
Our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing.
Fuck yeah.
We begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Okay.
Thank you, Nora.
That was a weird setup, but okay.
Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region.
Oh, we're going to hear how JD Vance. I've never heard him speak about this issue at all.
Iran is weakened, But the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met.
This is a good pivot.
And both of his secretaries of defense,
but I hate how this opened.
His national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding
who's worked
that our allies
around
matter.
the clock
When
for a
our
ceasefire.
allies see
An
Trump
expansion of
turn
this
towards
war.
Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea. When we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed.
Very
and
depressing.
As the Vice
Already
President
out the
said
gate,
today is,
depressing.
we will protect our
Middle
forces
East,
and our
depressing.
allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question.
Take it back. They're going to be
Would you
very,
support
very
or
similar
oppose
on this issue. Let me
by Israel
immediately
on
amend
Iran?
what I
You have
said.
2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me.
And that is why I want to
because my
take both
own
things
mother struggled
away
with addiction
from
for a big chunk of my
black
early
people
life.
mostly
I went
and
to
immigrants.
college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes.
And all you got to do is open your asshole to a billionaire,
back in the White House,
venture capitalist, and man, the doors that will open up
we have to
for
remember
you.
that as much
Just
as Governor
opening
Walz
one
just
small
accused
door.
Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line.
This is why
Iran,
that's
which
why they
launched
chose
this
Vance.
attack, has received over
Effective
$100
deterrence.
billion
Nobody knows what that means. He doesn't know what that means. It just
thanks
sounds
to the Kamala Harris
smart.
administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength.
To dance with an orb that the Saudi government gave you.
The United States global
Then
leadership would
they
put
chop up
stability
an
and
American
peace back
journalist,
in
and
the
you
world.
don't do shit
Now,
about
you asked
it.
about a preemptive
And
strike,
Biden
Margaret, and I want to answer
basically
the
does the
question. Look,
same.
it is up to Israel
we move
what
on?
they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Okay, so he didn't go negative. He didn't go
Governor
negative.
Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's
Okay, this is
fickle
good
leadership.
receipts, but
And when
Biden didn't
Iran
do
shot
shit
down an
to
American
re-enter
aircraft
the
in
Iran
international
deal.
airspace,
So
Donald Trump
here we
tweeted,
are.
because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance,
hold your
the U.S.
breath
did
on
have a
everything being
diplomatic
calm in
deal
that
with
region.
Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events.
Who is more of a barnacle on Bibi Netanyahu's asshole, and both of them
I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala
Israel
Harris.
expanded.
So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out?
40?
The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to.
I know we need new young people, but
let's turn now to
Vance
Hurricane
is
Helene.
way
The
too young
storm
to
could
be
become
fucking
one
vice
of the
president. I'm
deadliest
sorry,
on
I don't know
record.
why.
More than
That felt really gross
160
and awful to
people
me. Like
are
my
dead,
friends are
and
older than
hundreds
he is.
more are missing.
Someone say people in this
Scientists say
room are older
climate
than he
change
is.
makes
What?
these hurricanes larger,
Who's in this room?
stronger,
My cat.
and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS
I love
News
how he's
polling,
also, I'm
7
40.
in 10 Americans
No big deal.
and
I'm
more than
40.
60% of
Didn't have that much
Republicans
work
under
done.
the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust
And Joe Biden was the one who sawed a hole in that roof, and I'm sure the governor can agree.
People in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job.
They don't love you. You couldn't fill a fucking
when Donald Trump is president
event
again,
over
the
there.
government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. And Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important
what
issue.
is
Look,
that?
a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change.
Here
let's
we
just
go.
say that's
Here we
true,
go.
just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science.
Let's
just say
that's true.
Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world.
Well, that's
What has
bullshit, but
Kamala
that's
Harris's
exactly
policies
what
actually
Biden
led
is
to?
doing.
More energy production in
The
China,
Inflation Reduction
more
Act?
manufacturing overseas, more doing business in
What the
some
fuck
of
are
the
you
dirtiest
Oh,
parts
God,
of the
this
entire
is
world.
easy.
When I say that, I mean
This is
the
easy.
amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and
Let's
cleaner
say you
water,
believe
the
that
best thing to do
carbon
is to
causes
double down
climate
and
change,
invest
which
in
I don't think it
American
does.
workers
And in order
and the
to
American
be in this
people. And
position, I can't
unfortunately,
admit that it
Kamala
does.
Harris
But
has
let's just
done
say for the
exactly
sake of
the opposite.
argument,
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together.
Was his earpiece malfunctioning? What was that? Let the conspiracy theories fly.
The federal government comes in, make sure they're there to that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax, and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting.
Ooh, that's a good line.
To tell me, look, I harvest corn.
This fool don't have no farmers. Look at JD Vance. He doesn't have farmers. He's like, what is a farm?
We ever have. We're also producing more clean energy.
I just want to see them milk a cow. Like, I think we should just solve this. Who is more Americana? You milk a cow, you got to wrestle a chicken, you got to tie its feet up. That's very simple.
You can do that at the same time.
Who's more country? Who is more Appalachia? Who's more Middle America? Who's more Midwest? Midwest princess, let's go.
An energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about, how do we mitigate these disasters?
Thank you, Senator. I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that
then we'll think about how we stop them.
Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats,
in
particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States.
That's literally what they're doing. Oh my God.
So clearly Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said that is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America.
Why? Because Chinese are dirty?
But a lot of them are being made overseas in China.
Because Chinese are dirty. The Chinese are dirty.
So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility in the past 40 years. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that
don't say mitigation, just say prevent.
How do we make sure that we're protecting?
Nobody understands that word. It's a really big word.
More and more of. But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that. And an all above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists,
but he didn't really seal it. He
is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as.
So again, we've got the three worst issues on when it comes to differentiating them:
is pledging to carry out the
Middle East, immigration,
in American history,
and climate change.
And to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work?
Well, yeah, you got to
For
round them
example,
up first
would you
with
deport parents
prods.
who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil?
Yes.
You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has
in this country, guys. It's being manufactured here. I mean, look, you guys are talking about American manufacturing. We manufacture it here. Okay, that's American-made fentanyl.
At record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our country.
The wages of American
that'll
workers.
Be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation.
I wish
right now
we had someone better than Walz on this.
320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish she would do that.
They did. Don't you hate when both of them are wrong? Because they continue
to any specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children.
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history.
That's
30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here.
I have a cold, so I'm not drinking, but this is like me. If I was drinking, I would be
border agents
already drunk.
Protection for
I can't handle this shit.
DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as that was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it.
Track down more migrants.
A campaign issue.
Help you in your life.
What would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they
Bitch,
need to
look
be
at the
done
clock. Don't look at the
by
clock.
the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people.
There we go.
And telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up.
The bill that sucks, the bill that basically criminalizes asylum seeking.
From their children.
people under
even if
international
their
law.
kids are U.S. citizens.
And
You have
American
1
law,
minute.
too.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of
Kamala
illegal
Harris
crossings.
was
We had a
not
record
in
number
charge
fentanyl
of
coming
the
into our
border
country.
policies. Can
And
we just
now,
fucking
now that she's running
can
for president, or a few
someone?
months before, she
I
says that
hate
somehow
that we
she
have
got
to
religion and
debate
cared a lot about
them
peace and
on their
legislation.
merits, or
The
even on the
only
media's
thing that she did when she became the
like
vice
in their
president, she
framing.
became
The
the
framing
border
is
czar, was
bullshit.
to undo
She wasn't the
94
border
Donald Trump
czar.
executive actions
She was
that
supposed to
opened
go
the
after
border.
root
This
causes.
problem is
Remember, we
leading
did a
to
whole episode on
massive
this. You guys can
problems
watch
in
it.
the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator,
I
your
love that
time
none
is
of
up.
this really
Governor,
matters. None of
what
this
about
really fucking
our
matters.
CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
I really appreciated that answer. Humanizing immigrants is the fucking answer. And like, get specific, you know? These are our neighbors. These are our friends. These are people we work with. These are like, come on.
Purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually
I've been shown around by vigilantes with Punisher stickers on their cars.
But most of this is about the president and the vice president
empowering
our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper
horseback,
now, Governor Walz
chasing Haitian migrants. Can we talk about that? Is that on everyone's clock? I think it is.
Said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable.
And they
because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes.
They didn't ask you to demonize the migrants. They asked you for more assistance, like English language assistance. No, you are so full of shit, dude. They literally asked JD Vance for more assistance with like ESL programs, with like just anything to like train up people. It wasn't deport them, demonize them. Let's see what
law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Yeah,
Thank you,
but does
Governor.
it?
And
But
just
that's a
to
pretty good
clarify
answer. Just that,
for
like,
our viewers, Springfield, Ohio
just that
does have a
sneak
large number
scripture
of
reference.
Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected
Well,
status.
Margaret,
Nora?
but
Thank you,
Oh,
Senator. We
fact
have so
checking.
much to
Margaret,
get to.
hang on,
I think
hang
it's
on. They're
important
black.
because
Hang on,
the
Margaret, they're black.
economy,
Margaret,
thank
the
Margaret,
rules
Margaret,
were
Margaret,
that
they're
you guys
black.
were going to
Margaret,
fact
they're
check,
black.
and
Margaret,
since you're fact
they're black.
checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on.
Oh.
So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border
Oh my
law.
God. Oh my
That is
God.
not a person coming in, applying for a green card,
No,
and
those
waiting
people
for
are
10
waiting
years.
on the
That is
Mexico side of the
facilitation
border,
illegal
guys.
immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those
We have
laws
so
have been on
much.
the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
want to have.
One app has not been on the books.
But the CBP app doesn't change immigration law. Oh, they just muted them.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so
Gentlemen.
much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is
Nora
a top
and
concern
Margaret
for
just
voters.
fucking-
Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back
Thank
and
you,
forth,
Little
and
Mac.
It's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes,
Thank you for
I've seen it
reminding
in
us.
Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting
Do the right
businesses
thing for
off the ground.
families.
The law as
Oh,
it stands
JD
right
Vance,
now
look at
is
this. He's like, oh
$5,000
man,
tax credit for
I
small
picked the
business,
wrong party.
increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald
This guy's
Trump
the real
made a
deal.
promise,
He
and I'll
looks
give you this. He kept it.
real.
He took folks
I
from
am
Mar-a-Lago,
fake.
said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that
But
predominantly
I've
went
got
to the
my
top
money to
pass.
cry
What
into.
happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it.
He's
It
talking
would
about the
increase
tariffs.
inflation and potentially lead to a recession.
I feel like
this
they
is
are.
simple for
Paige
you.
is saying
Where
that
are we going?
a
Kamala
lot of the
Harris has
talking
said to
points are
do the
very
things she
like,
wants
if
to
you
do,
follow the
we'll
news,
just
I
ask the
agree.
wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that,
I think there
our
needs to be more
system works
context
best.
given to
More
what the
people are
things they're both
participating
talking
in it,
about.
and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly,
well,
the Wharton School
nice.
has done an analysis of
Ooh,
the
good
Trump
for you.
plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My
Uh-oh.
question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer. A lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do, and some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done
And Joe
instead
Manchin
is
wanted
drive the cost of food
his
higher
yacht.
by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class
Nobody's
life
talking about the border,
unaffordable
bitch.
for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can
Not
trust
when she's
her
asking
actual
for a
plans.
promotion.
Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is
Ugh,
not
did
just a
that
plan,
rub
but it's
anyone
also
else
a record.
the
A
wrong
lot of
way?
those same economists
That
attacked Donald
feels-
Trump's plan. plans.
Very
And they have
disrespectful.
PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic
promotion.
policies
You guys are
delivered
asking
the
for a fucking
highest
handout. Come on
take-home
now.
pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense,
What about the
I say,
$2
look
trillion
at the
that
record.
was
He delivered
added
rising
added to the deficit because of the tax breaks for the 1%? $2 trillion. $2 trillion. $2 trillion.
Tax cuts. But if you look at what was so
Please talk
different
about the
about
tax
Donald
breaks.
Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax
Is
cut
that they
plans,
helped
is that a
us,
lot
you know,
of
like
those
you and
resources
me.
went to giving
You know what I'm
more
saying? Like
take-home
people with
pay to middle class
fireplaces
and
and
working
like
class Americans. It
marbles,
was passed in
you know,
2017,
kitchen tops.
and you saw an
Like
American
it's just
economic
us,
boom
you know,
unlike
you,
we've
me,
seen
the
in a
Fabergé
generation in
egg.
this country. That
You
is
know,
a record
us
that
who
I'm
like
proud to
take the
run on, and we're
PJs
going to
and
get
yeah,
back to
we've
that
seen
common
Taylor
sense
Swift
wisdom
in
so that you can
multiple
afford to
cities,
live
you know,
the American
like
dream
box
again. I
seats. You
know
know what I
a
mean?
lot
You
of you are
and
struggling.
me.
I know a
Us.
lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted.
Yep.
Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there,
Mayo
teachers,
Clinic. That's where I go
nurses,
to
truck
figure out
drivers,
what's
whatever,
wrong with
how
me.
is
Like,
it fair
right?
that
Instead of
you're
going to the
paying your
doctor,
taxes every
Mayo
year,
Clinic.
and Donald Trump hasn't paid
dining.
any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
Governor, you say trust the experts, but those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that.
Okay, now you're
being wrong about the idea that if we made America
it
less
did not help the middle class, but you can get cheap
in our
shit.
own nation, that it would somehow make us better off. And they were
guys
wrong
know how
about
cheap
it.
toys
and for
are?
the first time in a generation,
getting
Donald
toys
Trump
for your
had
kid.
the wisdom
Remember before
and
it
the
was like
courage to
$60
say
for
to that
anything. Now it's like,
bipartisan
that's like
we're not doing it
$5. You can get
anymore.
so
We're
many
bringing
toys.
American manufacturing back. We're unleashing
Ask my
American
child.
energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now.
That's what I call them, 7, 4, and 2, because I can't remember their names.
That we put in the bodies
Yeah,
of
their
our
names are
children
ethnic,
manufactured
so
by
I'm not
nations
going
that
to
hate
say
us.
them
This
on
has
national
to stop,
television.
and we're not going to stop it by listening
742.
to experts.
Is that a
We're gonna
Nazi
stop it by listening to
sign?
common sense
Probably.
wisdom,
742.
which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercut to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home.
Call him out. Nobody knows he's venture capital. Nobody knows what venture capital means.
Has a record 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household.
So what are you going to do about
healthcare?
Like what's your healthcare plan? Do you have concepts of a plan?
We can do
Give
so much
concepts of a
better.
plan?
To
How's
all
the
of you
concept?
watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on healthcare then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions.
Really?
We want to ask you about your leadership.
I don't know if
qualities.
that's true.
Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher.
They both use the GI Bill.
First year
Well,
out, I got the opportunity in
very
the
white.
summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams.
Oh, I
we
fucking
would
love
take
him.
dancers,
Oh, I
and
love
we would
him.
go back and forth to China. The
I
issue for that
love
was to
him.
try and learn. Now, look,
I
my
love
community
him.
knows
Okay,
who
that's
I
it.
am.
I love
They
him.
saw where I was at.
My mom's watching
They-
this right now, and she's
look,
just like,
I
I
will be the
love
first to
him.
tell you,
Any
I
kind
have
of like
poured my
U.S.
heart into my
China
community.
civil
I've tried
programs
to
where
do the
people
best I
go and
can,
learn
but I've not been
from one
perfect,
another, I think
and
is
I'm a
great,
knucklehead at
and I
times,
support
but
those
it's always
programs
been
because
about
we
that.
demonize
Those
one
same
another
people
far too much. We
elected
should
me
do
to
it with
Congress
multiple countries
for 12
that we
years.
supposedly
And
hate.
in Congress,
I
was one of
love
the most
that.
bipartisan
Oh
people.
God,
Working
he
on
just
things
won
like
over
farm
the
bills that
Asian
we got
American.
done,
Asian American
working on
Democrats are
veterans
like,
benefits.
what?
And then the people of Minnesota
Okay,
were
you
able
did
to
an
elect me to
exchange
governor
program.
twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising
Also, what
Xi
a weird
Jinping
fucking
about
fact
COVID.
check. Like,
And I guarantee
I don't
you
understand
he wouldn't start a
why
trade war
it
that he
matters.
ends up
Also, I don't know
losing.
what he said.
So this
but
is
I don't
about
fucking
trying
like
to understand the world. It's about trying to
What
do
does
the
this?
best you can for your
What
community.
does it matter?
And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
You went
Governor,
to
just
China,
follow
you
up on that,
fucking
the
communist.
question was, can you explain the
No, just
discrepancy?
all I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was
Perfect.
in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Okay,
Thank you, Governor.
that wasn't the worst,
Senator
but also,
Vance,
who
in
the fuck
2016,
cares?
you called
Who
your
the
running mate Donald Trump
cares? I don't give a
unfit
shit.
for the
He didn't
nation's
say he was in a
highest
Black
office,
Hawk
and you said
helicopter,
he
like
could be
flying.
America's
He didn't say
Hitler.
like, well,
I know
actually,
you've said
I
you've
was
been asked
standing in
many
front of the
times, and
tank
you've
too.
said
What
you
the
regret
fuck?
those
He
comments
doesn't. Ugh.
and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the
So
Washington Post
inconsequential.
reported
It's
new
like a
messages
weird
last
thing to
week in
hone
which
down
you
on.
also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record.
You blame
But
the
most
media.
importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out the messages from 2020.
What about the
Margaret,
cats and dogs,
consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have
Ask
done
him about
better
the cats
in the
and
Trump
dogs.
administration.
Everyone
the first
knows what he's
round
going to say about Donald Trump.
Congress was doing
hit
its
Walz
job.
on
I
some
strongly believe, and I've
random
been a United
bullshit.
States senator,
Ask him,
that Congress is not
JD
just
Vance
a
about the
high-class
lie that
debating
he just
society. It's
spun
not just
2
a
weeks ago.
forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're not probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue,
a lot
the
more
most
than that.
pro-worker part of the Biden administration.
It's
the one issue where Kamala Harris
he continued
has
border
run away
policies.
from Joe Biden's
He
record.
continued.
Think about this. If you're trying to
policies.
employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
I wish we had a better line against free trade and their fake populism.
Governor Walz,
Democrats
after Roe versus Wade
we've
was
had
overturned, you signed a bill
had
into law
40
that made
years
Minnesota
now.
one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor.
Yep.
And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky,
everywhere,
Hadley Duvall,
everywhere.
a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody
JD Vance,
else's
push back
business.
on that.
But
Say
those
you
things
did
are being
IUI or
proposed.
whatever the fuck.
And the catch-all
his
on this
pushback on it.
is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world.
56%.
This is about healthcare. In Minnesota, we are ranked
56%.
first in healthcare for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator,
First
do you
in
want to respond to
healthcare,
the governor's
okay.
claim? Will you create
Can
a
we go to
federal
Minnesota?
pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because
And then they
feel like
later
didn't
were
have any
like,
other options.
I wish I
And,
didn't
you know,
do that.
one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight.
Is she
and I
your
love
trans
you.
friend who
And she told
you
me something a
like
couple years ago
excommunicated
that
from
she
your life?
felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship.
Okay.
And I think that what
How
I
does he
take from
get out of
that
this
as a
one?
Republican
Is
who
to stop
proudly
abusing.
wants to protect
We need
innocent life
stronger
in this
men,
country who
stronger
proudly wants
men.
to protect the vulnerable is that my
Male
party, we've got to
figures.
do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do.
What?
I want
Is
us
he
as a
admitting that you
Republican
guys
Party
suck on this?
to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place
How are you going to do that?
to raise
How?
that family.
How?
I
With
think there's
Kamala
so
Harris's
much that we
plan?
can do
How?
on the public policy
Literally
front
how?
just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald
He
Trump has
sounds
been
like a
very clear
crisis
that on the
pregnancy
abortion
center, like come
policy
to life.
specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia.
Look,
Georgia has a
Georgia
different viewpoint
uteruses
from
are very
Arizona.
different
And the
from
proper
California
way to
uteruses.
handle this, as messy
When
as
a
democracy
uterus
sometimes
in
is to
Chicago
let voters make
has
these
a zygote,
decisions,
it's very different
let
than
the
when a
individual
uterus in
states make
Dallas
their
has a
abortion
zygote.
policy. And I think that's
Uteri
what makes
are
the most
different,
sense
you know,
in a
and they're
very
evil,
big,
and
a
you
very
got to kill them with
diverse, and let's
fire
be honest,
mostly.
sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Weird
The
answer.
question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that
She's a
your
mom.
life
Tell us she's a mom.
and your
I don't know who
rights,
Amber Thurman is.
as
She was a
basic
mama.
as the right to control
She's,
your
I think,
own
a
body,
6-year-old.
is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today.
Ooh.
That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though,
Senator
is
Vance
not,
was
and that's
doing
the problem.
something different.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past,
did
you
JD
have
Vance just
supported
say our party
a federal
sucks on
ban
this?
on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not. So I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust.
So
many young women would love to have
with
families.
The majority
so
of
many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something
Tim.
that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships.
Yeah,
and
it's the leading cause of poverty, being a parent.
Trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real
leadership is. It's so creepy what they're proposing because it is.
I'm going to respond on the pro
within a regime of control.
We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and
Minnesota
say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all.
Talk about how Amber Thurman was a mom.
Pro-freedoms for women to make their choices.
Georgia
and we're going, and Kamala Harris
stole
is
a
making the
mother
case
from a child
options for
because of their anti-abortion law.
$6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
What happened?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive.
What
And I certainly
is this
wish that she
fucking
was.
reversal
And
from
maybe
Vance?
you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me. But as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion.
What?
That is, I think,
That's
whether
not
you're
true.
pro-choice or
That's not how the law
pro-abortion,
is.
that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because
Survives a
some of what
late-stage
we've
abortion?
seen,
You mean
want to force Catholic
a
hospitals to
miscarriage?
perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things.
Hey, how the fuck does he get to interject?
Misread, and it was
Fuck
fact
up,
checked the
dude.
last debate.
How does he get to
But
interject?
the point on this
Look
is
at that
there's a
bitch.
continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things work best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care.
There you go.
So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
Cue music, cue music. Yay. All right, guys. Well, it's definitely more of a debate because Donald Trump's brain isn't ruining it. JD Vance is weirdly walking away from his anti-abortion stance, but in a really conniving, as Paige, the producer, said, like Yale debate tactic type way. You know what? No, you are right. You are right. And we do need to do better. And we will. And we just need to look inward. And I'm in agreement, but also you're trying to kill babies. And I just we are in agreement that you kill babies and eat them and you do rituals with them, but we have to do better. I mean, obviously you guys believe in aborting the baby even after it's born, but we must do better. It's a weird, mind trick reversal that he's doing there. But I guess he assessed all of his other talking points. And because he's not Mike Johnson, meaning I don't know how much he truly believes in restricting abortion. And I don't know how much he can use the power of the Lord to blot out the reality of what women are facing across this country. You know what I'm saying? Because a real believer would be well, let's talk about your uterus, Nora. You're what? Probably premenopausal, maybe directly in menopause. You might be having hot flashes right now. What the scripture says is that you've no longer served your function and you should be ground up into sausage for my dogs. And that. That's what Vance wants to say. I'm saying that's that Mike Johnson shit. When Mike Johnson's just oh, but women are evil. Evil. They tempt me. Temptress. What? Why are there two temptresses asking me questions? That's what he wants to say. But instead, he's reining it in and he's, doing it a little bit different. So look, the first three issues were Gaza. I mean, no, sorry. Nobody's talking about Gaza. Everyone's talking about Iran. And Tim Walz was basically echoing the exact same talking point that Kamala Harris has. did say humanitarian crisis. That was a fun, I guess, change, but means nothing. Vance did the exact same thing, and basically they argued about the character of both of their candidates versus the actual substance. And then I think the biggest thing for me, I mean, look, climate was embarrassing. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a little bit too abstract for Americans to understand, and I really wish there was some framework, like a Green New Deal, that we could actually use to rally behind. Hey, we're creating, green jobs, union jobs, and Walz maybe missed an opportunity to talk about some of the Inflation Reduction Act projects and how like 60% of them have been completed and all this and that. So a little bit of a missed opportunity, but again, they're, Biden largely continued, the Trump administration, both on the Middle East policies, but then also on climate change, extracting more oil than ever before. Yes, on natural gas, which is, what is it, 40 times more of a heat trapping than regular carbon, methane is when you produce natural gas. And then the biggest difference, I would say, is on immigration, that you began to see inklings of a different tone from Tim Walz that we've not seen from Kamala Harris, even humanizing immigrants. He didn't quite seal the deal there, but that was, to me, a glimmer of difference.
CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90%, and some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan
magically wave a wand. I keep racking my brain.
I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there. But our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted
also people that go see movies,
red flag laws, enhanced background
also people
checks.
who want to like,
and we can start to get data. But here's
the
the
mall,
problem. If we
or,
really
like,
want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence.
Yeah.
And this idea that we should just live with it. And I here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have
one
some
mass
of these
shooting
weapons
and
out
that was
there,
it.
it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being
I want to go to those
owe
countries.
it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful.
Shut up.
I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem
big here.
and Finland. Is okay. First of all,
million people.
We have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it.
These are
Another
good
driver of the gun violence
ideas.
epidemic,
Lock
especially
up
that
the
affecting our
mentally ill,
kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines.
put them to
but is
work
the
in work
terrible gun
camps, and
violence
then we
problem
can use
in a lot of our big
labor
cities.
to
And
compete
this
with
is why we have
China's
to
labor.
empower
We'll use
law
our
enforcement
slave
to
prison
arrest the
labor
bad guys,
to
put them
compete with
away, and
China.
take gun offenders
Bing,
off
boom,
the streets.
bam.
I think there's a whole host
Praise
of things that we
Jesus.
can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban,
Tim
but only later in your
harder.
political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think that's a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices.
I've become friends with school shooters is not a good line, Paige, but the rest of it was really good. You mean school shooting victims.
Assistance for
Just
first-time home
misspoke.
buyers,
It's okay.
and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the vice president is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've stripped.
This is an ad for Minnesota, but also, can we do that
to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance?
Good.
We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in. But we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities.
Bring back immigrants, humanize immigrants. Let's go.
Is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising? And what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, you build them out of the immigrants.
Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable.
Margaret, I find his tone about Kamala Harris to be incredibly obnoxious. And I don't mean to be whatever about this. I don't mean to be too fragile. But please stop. She's running for president. She's the sitting vice president. Stop talking down to her. It's fucking disgusting.
The lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing release.
What does that even
for American
mean?
Citizens? Not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
How is American energy not
23
open?
seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening
all
up
the animals are dead. Okay,
we have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes.
Illegal immigrants and the animals, or the animals and the
who deserve to be here.
And Senator, and your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in.
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's again blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, We protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that.
This is what I
think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still
shots fired at the invisible hand of the market.
Economists.
Shots fired at the invisible hand of the market.
You don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point,
okay, JD Vance doesn't have an answer. So
there are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices.
To go
it's
into
also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris.
Oh,
look, we are a country of builders.
Less
we're a
regulation.
Country of doers. We're a country of explorers.
Yeah, why do you need regulation on the building?
Administration that makes it harder to develop our resources.
There ever
makes
been
it
an
harder
earthquake?
to build things and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they
Amazon
have to
boxes
do.
on the inside of this wall instead of insulation.
Homes who aren't able to build homes.
Code.
I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, I have concepts of a plan. Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family
I have a pre-existing condition myself as a douchebag, and when I went on to Blue Shield, they were like, "We can address
this." A lot of
this.
people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. I think it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress,
we don't
you're not
have
going to
a plan.
propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now,
I don't want to bore you. I'm like really
again,
smart, but like,
to be proud of.
I don't want you to get lost in the
fell in
details,
2018
so
for
I'm
the
not going
first
to
time
tell
in
you
a very
the
long time. Under
specifics.
Kamala
But
Harris's
I've got
leadership,
them.
prescription drugs
I've got
are
like
up
a lot
about
of words,
7%.
but you don't
Under Donald Trump's
understand those
entire
words,
4
so I'm
years,
just
they
going
were
to
up
use
about 1.5%.
basic words like
He
very
introduced
bad
pricing
and
transparency.
whatever.
Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That's price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice.
Oh, you believe in price?
Will also
Dude,
drive down costs.
First of all, if we have price transparency, we will have Medicare for all in no time. I actually agree with that. Price transparency in healthcare is amazing. If first of all, no one would go to the doctor, number one, but also we would probably have a mass uprising. One of the two.
The United States, and I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done, but when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do.
No, they tried to
Donald Trump
they
has
tried to
earned
destroy
right
the
to put
ACA
in
through
place
the
some better
budget
healthcare
multiple
policies.
times.
He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Oh, God.
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley.
The Mayo
3M,
Clinic?
Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare.
God, this
And
fucking
so what I know
Minnesota
is under Kamala
postcard
Harris,
bullshit.
more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on
Is that the
to
same
a
thing? You've
lawsuit
got to break it down
to
for
repeal
dummies.
the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill.
That's right.
Now, fast forward.
I
what
mean,
that
obviously,
means to you
the
is
loser,
you lose your
John
pre-existing
McCain.
conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator,
That was
you
a very
have
good
not yet
answer, even
explained
though
how you would protect
we need to do
people
so
with
much more than
pre-existing
protect and
conditions, or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance
Barack
marketplace
Hussein Obama.
Now, what Governor
He's
Walz
the
just
son of
said is
immigrants.
actually
He's
not true.
black.
A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher, and he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the
that's the
Affordable
thing about
Care
Donald
Act go
Trump. You
up
guys,
under the Trump
the
administration?
thing about Donald Trump, he didn't complain.
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is— So you think
the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there.
There's a better line.
We are able to
There's a
make
better
it,
line
and
here.
we are making it this
If
way.
you're going to defend
when
the
we
ACA,
incentivize people to be in the market.
MSNBC series on the ACA, dude. I know a lot about this shit.
Get there.
Talk about
and we make
how
sure then when
11,
you get sick
12
and old,
states
it's there for
haven't
you. Because I
expanded
heard people say,
Medicaid.
well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70.
Oh, God.
So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the
that
first
she's
time in
being
American
sued
history.
for, right?
Thank
You can talk about
Margaret.
talk about being sued by Big Pharma. I think the biggest thing for me is under the American Rescue Plan. If you guys buy ACA, if you buy your health care, I do. Under the American Rescue Plan, you get money, a subsidy. So my shit is super expensive, but thanks to Biden, it's like $500 cheaper a month. And I know what you're saying. I can't believe it's more than that. Yeah, but that's because of the American Rescue Plan. He should have talked about that.
For you.
Child care, very
How
interesting.
long should employers be required to pay workers
baby
while
gets
they
put
are
down.
home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child,
Universal.
And I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue.
Become a pro-family state,
big companies
a
are able to
pro-human
offer
state.
it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some cases, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money.
Yes.
And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time
Make it
is
easier
up.
for your little
Senator,
proto-natalist
do you support
movement.
a national paid leave program? And if so,
Margaret
for
looks
how long
unwell. I'm
should
sorry. I
employers
don't
be
mean to judge,
mandated
but she
to
looks.
pay their employees while
He's
they
not
are home
holding up
taking
as
care
well
of their
as
newborn?
anybody
You have
else
2
is.
minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats too have worked on this issue, and I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who's an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator, and I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access
I'm
to
joking.
paid family
You all know
leave
that,
because
right?
she worked
I'm
for a
pretending
bigger
to be
company.
one of
But the
Trump
cultural
fans
pressure
who's
on
like, how
young
can we
families and
trust
especially
Vance?
young women,
Here we go.
I think makes it
Don't talk about
really
young
hard
women.
for
Please
people to
don't talk
choose
about
the
young
family
women.
model
That's
they
gross.
want. A lot of
Grosses
young
me out.
women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home
Bitch,
with the kids. Some would
nobody
like to
wants
spend
to go back
longer at
to
home
work
with the kids.
immediately.
We should
I
have
know.
a family care
You don't.
model that makes choice possible.
I
And I think
love
this
this
is a very
idea of
important
choice.
substantive difference.
I love this idea of like some people would like to work through labor. Some people would like to be on the job. Some people would like to be on the shop floor stocking heavy items as soon as they give birth. Others don't. Like that is bullshit. Nobody wants to go back to work immediately.
One kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare. Because look, it is
when anyone says choice other than
of course, Tim and I have
pro-abortion
been on the
choice,
campaign trail a
pro-choice,
lot the past 7 or 8 weeks.
they
And
mean
one of the biggest complaints I
degradation
hear
of
from young
services.
families is
They
people
mean
who feel
if
like
you're
they
rich
don't
enough,
have options.
if you're rich
Like they're
enough, you can
choosing
buy your
between
way
going
out.
to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible
This
burden
guy wants to give
put on
a
American
child
families.
care
We're the only
license
country that does it.
to
I think we could do it.
literal predators, drunks, anyone who's in the community.
Said, Senator
And
Vance,
just be like, you know, start
many things
this
about
is
the
like
American
a
family.
if Homer were like, you know what we
says
should do? We should start a child care at Moe's Tavern, and Barney can look up like straight up. That is what Vance's plan is just lowering the bar. And he's talked now he's doubling down at lowering the bar for child care providers.
As being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in.
That's
Is
Trump.
President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in
that's
a
a good
lot of
boy.
money by
That's a good boy.
penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers.
Oh, yeah,
It's
we're
the
going to
heart
just
of
be
the Donald
employing
Trump
children.
economic plan.
Okay.
Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping
legit though, like the Republican plan for childcare is to send them into the coal mines at age 8. It's like they've got the small hands. You know, look, why don't they just like pack Amazon boxes? Let's go, you know, work in the pork processing plants.
That will solve the childcare shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options.
So basically Tim's plan.
And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now
basically
is
what
because
Tim said. Tim did a great job.
People providing this very essential service.
Yeah. So Tim's plan. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz plan.
Your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's 5,000 or 6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is
gross. I hate when he agrees with him. I think that's gross.
You're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, if those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not here. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy is growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy.
Call Donald Trump a threat, because that's
the 2020 election. President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal.
Okay, but like,
would you
that's
again
just your
seek
opinion,
to challenge
man.
this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully
at the ballot box
square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship.
Migrants,
it's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology
like your
companies
trans friend who
silencing
you
their
just
fellow citizens.
discarded like
And
a
it's
chewed up
Kamala
piece of
Harris
gum.
saying that rather than debate and persuade
Because it
her
like
fellow
wasn't
Americans,
politically
she'd
beneficial
like
to
to censor
to
people
continue
who
a
engage in
relationship with them,
misinformation.
huh?
I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this
Free
country
speech?
in the
You
last
mean
4
like freeing
years, in the last
Palestine?
40
You gonna
years.
stand by
Now,
that?
I'm really proud,
You think people should
especially
lose their
given that I
jobs
was
or be
raised by two
deported
lifelong
if they
blue-collar
support
Democrats,
Palestinian human
to
rights?
have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue.
Tulsi's name
But
was
we're united
invoked.
behind a basic
Everyone
American
drink a shot
First
of
Amendment
blood.
principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number
What
of
about
other
your boy
issues.
Elon
And that
Musk,
to me
who
is a
runs
much
one of the
bigger threat to
largest social media
democracy
platforms,
than what Donald Trump
who just
said when he
purged
said that
a
protesters should peacefully
journalist
protest on January the 6th.
for publishing something about you?
Well, I've
my
enjoyed tonight's
guy.
debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator. But
me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he did. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police.
Oh.
That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over.
I mean, can you blame him? Would he want to be hung?
Sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret? Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's
I don't
really
know about
rich
that.
for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy.
You should have just let
when
that
he
one sit.
peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250
No, he
years in
didn't.
this
He
country.
wasn't there.
We are going to shake hands after this
No, he
debate and
didn't.
after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help.
Trump wasn't at the
whenever
inauguration.
He wants
He
it.
notoriously
But we
missed
have
it.
to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time.
No, man. First of all,
And
number
if we
one,
wanna
they bought your
say
whole
that
party.
we
And
need to
number
respect
two,
the
bitch,
results of
nobody's
the
talking about
election,
Russia.
I'm on
Nobody's talking
board.
about this.
But if we want
You
to
can
say, as
protest
Tim
all
Walz
you
is
want.
saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had,
So you believe
I
in
don't buy
restricting
that.
freedom? You just talked about freedom of speech, and now
January
you think
6th
it's
was not
wrong to
Facebook
protest?
ads. And I think a revisionist history on
Fuck
this.
you.
Look, I don't understand how we got to this
Funny.
point.
Can you guys just
But the
fucking fight?
issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say
What do you
there's
mean?
no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator
Please
Vance.
stop.
I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability
did
to say.
see it
He is
in
still
one other
saying he
instance
didn't
in
lose the election.
American
I would just say
history.
that. Did he
Something
lose the
about
2020 election?
Tim,
Confederates?
I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation.
Bitch, what happened?
Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will
literally
long outlive
live
this
on
present political
Peter
moment.
Thiel's
I would like
pocket,
Democrats and
and you
Republicans
talk about
to
big
both
tech.
reject
You are funded by
censorship.
AI
Let's persuade
billionaires,
one another.
crypto
Let's argue
billionaires,
about
and you talk
ideas,
about
and then
big
let's
tech.
come together
Shut the fuck
afterwards.
You
up.
can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't
Senator,
wear
the
masks.
governor does have the
floor. Fire in a crowd.
Off of Facebook. Oh, people off of Facebook. I'm sure Kamala Harris is
Senator,
kicking
the
people
governor
off
does
of
have the floor for 1 minute to
Please.
respond to you.
Yeah. Well,
Facebook.
I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump?
Where is your neck going to be?
Where is the firewall if he knows
2 months?
He could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates, the CBS News Vice President.
Don't just make it stop. Does anyone want to hear JD Vance's closing speech? I sure as shit don't. I'm speaking quietly because my baby's being put down. She's crying. I thought that was an okay answer. I think thank God it got a little testy, and you could tell because the CBS anchors were like, don't cut away from this. All the control room was like, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. So it's like, let's do some back and forth, because you needed to just kind of like, it's like the show, one of the only reality shows that I ever watched was The Fifth Wheel. Did you guys ever watch that show? It was like two couples, and then like a bombshell comes in and is like, no, and or like a really like jack dude and like changes it all up. That's what we need. We need like a third wheel. We need someone to go in there and just be like, you know what? JD Vance said, your mama smells like onions. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of vibe that we needed. But yeah, I'm not sure if we're getting that. I thought that was a good answer. It was fine. I think it would be, to really, you want clippable things. We're supposed to do a breakdown of this whole debate. We want something clippable. We want something funny. We want something, we need a pets being eaten, that kind of thing. So I feel like Tim Walz missed an opportunity to sort of go at JD Vance and be like, I'm concerned about where your neck is going to be come January, like that. You know what I mean? A little zing. Festa Fiesta says Eric Andre as moderator. Honestly, something. JD Vance here's the thing. You can tell why JD Vance was picked as vice president. I mean, obviously the money, but other than the money, the crypto, he is good at laundering Donald Trump's bullshit. He is very good at lying about it. He's good at laughing it off. in a way that and he has like a little bit more of a personality, but not too much of one. And Mike Pence was really never able to do those things. Mike Pence couldn't he doesn't have that like Cybertruck vibe. You know what I'm saying? And JD Vance absolutely has that. I think the biggest thing is, we are still on ads, by the way. The biggest thing is that Walz keeps on agreeing with JD Vance, and he doesn't need to. Walz keeps on giving JD Vance sort of the benefit of the doubt, like he's a normal ass human, and he's not. As if he is not a craven, like sycophant of Donald Trump, power hungry, and who has really reactionary views about family. And he missed opportunities to talk about that. He just really did. Like, I just think that, like, you know, then again, that's me, right? That's us. And that might be young people. That might be people of color. That might be, you know, voters who the Democratic Party has shown that they're not that interested in winning over. They want middle America. They want white people. They want swing voters. They want people who maybe voted Trump but are tired of the drama. And so Tim Walz is going out there to be like, hey man, we can all get along, but I got to draw the line. Coach is going to draw the line at January 6th. That wasn't cool. Okay. But like, you know, all the other stuff we can agree on, you know, we can agree on killing a certain amount of Palestinians, and we can agree on a certain amount of climate emissions. And, so he's doing this bridge building that I think is effective, but once again, not for me, not for progressives. There's not a lot of Bernie moments. There's not a lot of bold ideas.
Debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country.
Dick Cheney
and
is
one where
not
our
an
politics
optimist.
can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something.
I hate that.
Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room,
maybe
but
it's
the freedom for you to make choices about yourself.
I like
now,
this.
Look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you.
The
Senator Vance, your closing
coin
statement.
toss page.
Well, I
Oh
want to
my
thank
God,
Governor
that's so
Walz,
sad.
you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being
Yes, you
raised by my
did.
grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford
What
a
about
nice
Texas?
meal for
Talk
your
about
family.
Texas.
That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl.
You're just going negative.
And that too has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies.
So Trump.
Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the
when
greatest
Republican
country, the most
politicians
beautiful country,
use a devastating thing like people who don't have food and are like, that's what I love about America. Remember when George W. Bush was like, we don't have, people working 2-3 jobs? That's the American spirit. Bitch, you met someone without food and you didn't just sit them down and gave them food.
Who has already
you were like, that's amazing. Thank you for praying for my family. Ew, now get away from me, poor.
Or vote for Tim Walz.
Oh, sorry.
So proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
Wow, that was so partisan. Did you just hear that, you guys? They told people to get out and vote. Gross. That is so super Democratic coded. Only Democrats encourage people to vote. That's insane. Guys, we're going to be doing a quick recap of all the highlights, the lowlights, the lights. I'll give you my thoughts in just a little bit. God, they're shaking hands. It's gross. I don't enjoy this. I love it. Oh, you're great. You know what? Can I work for you? Is there a position in the cabinet if I should lose? That'd be nice. Oh, that's fun. I'll just go back. I'll probably start a podcast though. Yeah, there's a little bit less work, get one of my kids to do it. Guys, this has been the Bitchuation Room live stream of the vice presidential debate. If you like this show, tip the show, TBR-live on Venmo, TBR live on Cash App, or become a patron, patreon.com. Damn, Paige already with the clips loaded. She is crushing it. We are ready to do our little rundown. But first, Baby Sagan says, I did a coup attempt last time. World is safer? That's apparently to JD Vance, I guess. Bill Overson, thank you for your super chat. Did they bring up the dogs and geese yet? No. Nobody brought up the geese, and I'm really disappointed. Like, if you're Walz, like, you gotta get a little bit more juice out of that. You know what I'm saying? Like, give him, like, there was a little bit of a reference to it. Tim Walz said, you admitted that you make up stories to demonize immigrants, but like, what was the story? What was the story? Tell us the story. Tell us the one about the Haitians eating the cats and dogs. Spice this up a little bit. Can we just do it over, but everyone's in chaps? You know what I'm saying? Little Mac, thank you so much for becoming a member. And also some pushback on what I said about Tim Walz being good on housing. Says, I'm sorry, but he was not crushing it. We have a serious and significant parasite landlord issue in this country that requires 1930s New Deal level policy influence. And no, he came nowhere close to implying that. I agree. I agree with you on not just on housing, but on healthcare, but on climate change, but on foreign policy. You are not seeing big visionary ideas, truly transformative and effective ideas coming out of Democrats. You're just not. I think, we are not in that place as a country yet. We are in it in terms of the majority of us want these things. But we are in a place of, hey, women shouldn't die from a miscarriage. Hey, I'm a hero. And you are, because that's the hell that we're in. That's the hell that was inherited from Donald Trump. That's the hell that was inherited from failed policies from both the left and the right, from the Democrats and Republicans. That's the failed policies that, let's be real, Joe Biden continued on immigration, on climate, on the Middle East. They have little daylight between the two of them, and you saw that on full display here, and it was upsetting. And so I agree with you that, 25K is not a solution. It is a start. I do think there's more promise when you hear Tim Walz say things like corporate landlords, or, getting corporations out of it, talking about decommodifying housing. That's the kind of language that you're talking about, Lil Mac. That's that New Deal language, right? That's the kind of stuff that we do need. And Chi Massey, thank you for the super chat. Don Hatlin says, come be my neighbor. I love Minnesota, because this was really just an ad for Minnesota. And Double O, member for 18 months, says, Trump's going to bring back common sense and rein in corporate greed. Cool story, bro. Common sense. My guy said we should inject bleach into your body, and his followers started drinking horse dewormer to stop COVID. Thank you, Kevin Young, for becoming a new member, and thank you, Nader Hernandez, as well. I apologize for missing the folks over on wait, maybe I don't. Maybe I do have my folks. No, on Twitch. But I'm going to do a little quick wrap. We'll do a little vid just in case this gets demonetized and I have to take it down. There is a new stream. Why don't we put that in the description, in the comments right now? It should be there, but let me just take 1 second just in case it's not there. We'll do a quick debate react with some thank you page with some of the clips, the best, the highlights, the lowlights. You guys weigh in, tell me what you think, and I will see you very soon.